All right, what is up, everybody? We're back with another episode of Effin' Growth. This is actually like a loop back. We kind of did a little time travel here. So this is episode 20. Last week was episode 21, but anyway, due to some technical issues that we had a couple weeks ago, we're coming back to the topic of how to fire a problematic client. So we're going to go through setting expectations, managing communications, watching out for warning signals, and then what to do if you actually have to let somebody go. You know, what if you have to step away from a relationship? So before we get into that, let's effing grow. Okay, what is up, Joe?
Hey, I'm ready for this one.
Yeah, this is it's funny because I was actually excited about having this conversation, and then I fried my computer, so we didn't get to do it. And we had such
an important topic.
Yeah, and then last week we had the conversation, what Webflow gets wrong. If anybody was with us for that, that was a fantastic episode. It went over really well. Although we were, not necessarily nervous, but it's a tough topic to take on heads up. And so, yeah, it was very well received. We got the attention of Webflow and their leadership team. We did have a conversation with Vlad, which we won't go into too many details about right now. But next week, we're planning a big workshop. And so next week, we're going to do like a how to get involved in the Webflow community event. But in addition to the stream, we're going to actually we're building a Miro board where you all will be able to dive in and give us like real-time feedback on things you would like to see happen in the community, events that we're doing, topics you'd like to see us cover, how Webflow can get involved. And so we'll have all of these different mechanisms for you all to kind of give us feedback and share about what we can do. And so the conversation went really well with Vlad. Joe, did you want to say anything about that conversation or kind of what we're working on here?
Yeah, it went better than expected. We went in with a plan to talk about something, and Vlad accepted it and received it 100%. There was nothing that we thought wasn't handled well in the conversation, and afterwards we were pretty excited. So we're creating a plan, we're working on some great stuff, and we are super excited to talk about it next week.
Great, yep. And for those wondering, Joe, his jungle died. No, his background. No, Joe's traveling this week, so some people were saying it's like you got a haircut, but different. Your background's a little different there. So some observant audience members today.
I am visiting family. You will see.
Go ahead.
I'm just alerting people. They'll see this for the next 5 sessions. I'm here. I'm visiting family, so this is my temporary work setup. But I'm ready to talk this. Let's effing grow.
Let's effing grow. Okay, so let's see. Clone Comp progress is going well. If you haven't signed up for that, clonecomp.webflow.io. We've got over 150 signups so far. Again, Webflow is in as a sponsor. We've got Lottie Files on board as a sponsor, Edgar Allen. Obviously, here at Finsweet, we're putting all the resources in and organizing this. We're doing the design, etc. Pixel Geek is in as one of our sponsors. He's sponsoring a dedicated prize for the best story-driven site. Connor Finlayson from the Unicorn Factory is doing a prize for like the best integration. Who else? JetBoost is on board as a gold sponsor as well. So the sponsors are just kind of rolling in. We're going to have over $15,000 of just cash and prizes to give away. Last year was like $7,000 or $8,000. So expect huge prize pools for this event. Sign up at clonecomp.webflow.io. We'll be, again, next week, we're releasing all the details. The full site will be live next week, and we'll have kind of all of the different pieces of information you all will need to take the next step on that. So let's see. I think that's basically it, Joe. We're still doing the Twitter Spaces on Friday. Yeah. So if you all are not following us on Friday, we had a bunch of people hanging out on Twitter last week. We're going to keep doing those. Those are pretty casual. So if you want to get involved in actually speaking and sharing, I know these streams are mostly Joe and I talking and answering questions and whatnot, but on Fridays, it's very interactive. Anyone can kind of jump in from the crowd, ask questions, talk. We just cycle through different topics. It's less structured. So if you want to just get involved and actually hanging out, Fridays is a good option for that. So, okay, let's leave it at that.
Cookie.
Oh, Oh, cookie
Cookie consent videos.
That's
Yeah,
right.
we
That's
we
right.
have all of our consent tutorials sitting in YouTube unlisted. We're getting the descriptions going, and we are going to launch those at some point today. So here's the intro for you.
Welcome to Finsweet Cookie Consent for Webflow.
Okay, so yeah, those are going out on YouTube right now. So they're on YouTube. We're taking all of the just getting the descriptions and the titles and all that squared away. But yeah, by the end of the day today, those will all be live for you to explore. For anybody looking for documentation on the cookie consent stuff, that will all be live by the end of business today. So there you go. Who do we have in the crowd? Let's say hi real quick. Let's see. We got Penny, Kai's in the house. Jay, what's up? Maggie's here. Robert's here. Brandon Tancott in the house. Babis, Wyatt. What's up, everybody? Welcome. Let's get into the episode today. So we're talking all about how to fire a problematic client. But, you know, the goal is not to have to fire your clients, right? So let's get into our disclaimer a little bit, because you can find yourself in problematic situations with clients every once in a while. And sometimes you may even have to let someone go. And so we're going to talk about that process, the warning signs, all of that. But the goal really should be not to find yourself in this position. So what we're going to kind of focus on leading up to that is setting some of these expectations, managing some of these situations that may evolve into something like that, like a problematic situation, and just talking a little bit about, you know, what you can do to protect yourself and make sure that this stuff doesn't happen. So Joe, what's up on your side of the disclaimer here?
Yeah, that this should feel more like a last resort, that you don't want to really go into relationships thinking that you're going to use these tactics. This is only something that should be used if you really cannot move forward, if you don't see a future in the project, in the company. That's when you use these. But like Reimar said, we want to avoid those. So how do we do that? We set the right expectations. We have to be really transparent about what we are going to do, what we want to do, what the client has to do, and how we all communicate. And this has to be done before the project starts, these expectations. I like to make a list of all the things that we're going to do as a company and all the things that the company is going to do. That could be writing content, that could be entering content, that could be any kind of tasks. Make it clear who is supposed to do what.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest key, is just like most of the time when stuff gets out of hand or you have a problem with a client, it's kind of due to those expectations. So I guess okay, let's get into the setting expectations, because I think that's enough disclaimer. I was deciding whether the stuff I wanted to talk about fell into disclaimer or not, but managing those expectations or setting yourself up to not end up in this position is kind of the biggest thing. And a lot of this has to do with how you frame the work, how you frame these conversations with the clients, how you set up the process for communication, the statement of work that you outline at the beginning, right? So a lot of times, you know, people want to shift into different modes, and they, like, the relationship you're building with the client starts from the beginning of these conversations, right? And so if you're having these conversations with a client and you're very carefree and you're very casual, and then all of a sudden you start to get rigid, you're probably not going to change that scope of communication with the client. And so you kind of want to start all the way from the beginning. You want to have consistency with how you set this stuff up with the client, because you can't just change speed, right? You can't just change gears with clients. And so, you know, that's a quick way to kind of like misalign some of these expectations. And really not having clear expectations to what you're supposed to do, right? Whose responsibility is what? Like Joe said at the beginning, like outlining who's going to do what, who are you going to talk to, having a specific person that you're going to communicate with on this project. You know, all of these things become important parts of setting those client expectations. Joe, what have I missed here as it relates to that?
Setting yourself up to over deliver. That when you set your expectations, don't set expectations that are higher than what you can actually achieve. That's just going to make you under deliver. So you have to set expectations, tell everybody what they're doing explain the quality of the work, explain what you're going to do, but make sure you can hit that and go above that. And when you start doing that during the project, the client sees it and they like the work. You can over deliver at every stage of the project. And you can do that by setting the correct expectations from the beginning.
Yeah. The other mistake that I see early creatives do, or and it's not even early level creatives. Like, I see people who are well established in their creative career doing this, because creators, we're typically empathetic, right? And we're typically excited about making the customer happy, or we don't want to create any extraneous conflict in that relationship. So if a client asks us for something, we're like, oh yeah, we'll get to that. That's no big deal. Ooh, maybe it is a big deal, right? Maybe it's a lot more than you think, right? And so you shouldn't get in the habit of just saying, yes, we can handle that, or no big deal, we'll just add that on at the end, or whatever it is, because a lot of times you end up stacking up work for yourself that at some point you're like, oh shit. And then it's 3 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now, from when you said yes to that person, and you actually have to do this extra work. And now you start thinking, oh, I'm not getting paid for this. This is dumb, right? And now the quality of your work starts diminishing because you start resenting the work that you have to do that wasn't scoped out at the beginning of this project. Yeah. And that now like is in your head, and you got to like figure out, shit, now you start resenting the client, or you start resenting the work because you didn't have that clear expectation. And so a lot of times creatives create these problems for themselves in the way that they communicate and manage those relationships, simply because they want to please, or they want to be agreeable with the client. Have you ever run into a situation like that, Joe?
Yeah, there is one that always comes back. And from the beginning, it's always been a hard no for me. And that's helping out with the content. We see this a lot in our industry. Someone comes primarily for the design, for the development, but they also want that full service solution from very start to very, very end. And that includes planning the content, maybe writing some content. And a lot of people will say yes to that. And that's the service that may blow the whole agreement. That from the beginning, day one, no matter what the project was always a hard no, because I didn't want to do that. I wanted to focus on the design side, the development side. So when that less important service to me came along, I told the client, hey, go find a professional in this. This is not something I do. It's not something I'm interested in. There are people that write content for you, and that's the person that you should be working with. So yeah, that one comes up all the time, and you have to learn how to say no if it's not a service you want to accept.
Robert's got me cracking up over here. Okay, look at this. Delete website. I'm thinking that's step one. Step two is hold client's DNS credentials for ransom. So Robert, this is the kind of situation we're hoping we don't find ourselves in. I will admit that I'm guilty of, like, there's been times where I'm like, fuck it, I'm going to turn these guys' website off, you know? So early on in my career, somebody doesn't pay a hosting bill. So when I was in WordPress, when I first started, I was like, I'm going to do everything. I'm going to do the maintenance. I'm going to do the build. I'll do the content. I'll do the hosting. I'll do everything. Right. And anyway, so I didn't know how to set up those contracts for hosting. And so I would set up these contracts. Client would pay me, deliver the site, and then it'd be like 6 months and they would make no hosting payment. And I didn't have anything written out for how to like just turn off their website or how to like collect that. I had no enforcement ability. And so I found myself on the hook just paying for WordPress servers, you know, with these clients and never having any kind of mechanism to like turn that off. And so later on, eventually I did build the clauses into my contract. And then one of the cool things with Webflow client billing is that on that third email of non-payment, they're going to cut that off and you don't have anything to do with it. Right. So it's, So I just kind of wrote that process out into my contract. And I was like, this is how it's going to work. You're not going to get a third warning. On the third trigger, that account is going to be turned off. And again, now you don't have that, but it's a clear expectation. So when it happens, client's not mad, right? Before, if I just say I'm going to turn off this client or this client's website, now you open yourself up to liability because I have no backing for that, right? So I have no expectation from the client. And this will get into the cover your ass statement, which is the next one about contracts and outlining the scope of work. But any thoughts there before we move over on that?
No, perfect transition. Yeah, right. You need to cover your ass. You need to make sure that the contract is clear you have a statement of work. It's listing all of these expectations in real words, not legal terms that are difficult to understand. The point of the contract and the point of having this agreement is for everybody to be clear, and you have to do that inside contracts.
Yeah, and Eunice is saying here, who can relate on the under promise and over deliver, but some clients don't notice and act likewise, keep asking for their tasks based on over delivering. So this is where pushing and pushing, Joe. So how do you stop this from happening, right? How do you, we're working on covering our ass. We're working on setting the expectations with the client, but now they keep seeing that we're like, oh, they're going to keep giving more. Okay. So they start asking and asking for more. So how do you protect Eunice here? How do you help him cover his ass a little bit?
Well, I think you keep pushing and over delivering until you're done with that work. And when you're done with that work, you don't work with that client anymore. That you have to do what you originally agreed to, but that doesn't mean you have to have that client as a client after the project. There are a lot of times we finish a project, we say, great, everybody was happy with this project, but we are never going to work with this client again. And that's how I look at it. Always over deliver until your expectations are met, then drop them. And that's an easy conversation. It's not a difficult conversation. There's no agreement to continue working afterwards.
Yeah. Well, and I also think, Eunice, that you don't necessarily this is where having clear barriers or clear, we will do this, we won't do this. And also I would also document the stuff that I over deliver. I used to actually invoice people for it, but then I would zero out the invoice so that they understood the value of what I delivered, right? And so if I deliver a feature that I would typically charge $1,000 or $3,000 for, or whatever it is, I would actually add that line item to the invoice. And then at the end, I would add a 0 for that item. But that way they see it on the invoice, they understand the value of it, and you're documenting that. So I don't know that that's exactly what you need to do every time, but it was something I did to help me translate the value to the client of some of those things that I would do above and beyond. And you can find things like that to make sure you come back to describing the value to the client so that you can earn some grace in that context. But also, if you don't set a threshold, if you don't give yourself a place to say, oh no, this is that extra stuff, then you're going to get trapped, where they can pull more and more and more. And that's where you end up potentially having to fire a client, or, ideally you want a client who hires you to do a website today to hire you to do the website again in another 18 months or another 2 years or whatever it is. And so you kind of want to figure out how to manage these relationships in a long and stable way, but that doesn't always work out. So, yeah, let's see. Nice tip. Yeah. Penny's going back and she was talking about find a good agency and partner with them. So there's some conversation in the comments here about getting into that content strategy. And let's see, let's stay on track here with the Joe, let's talk about covering our ass. So what is the statement of work? How do we manage clear client communications and contracts? And how do we establish those open lines of communications with the clients? So let's take those in order here. Statement of work first.
Yeah, statement of work is a list of deliverables. That's exactly what our statement of work is. The top says Finsweet deliverables, and it lists all of the deliverables. Then under it says company deliverables, it lists all of those deliverables. It says the price, it says the timeline and turnaround, and that's it. And we sign it. So it's very clear. It's written out, usually person by person, company by company, and it's something that anybody can read, understand, and make changes to if needed. Yeah. So that when we do something that's not on that list, we can say, hey, we normally don't do this, but we saw a good opportunity to do it, and we wanted to go do that for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and this doesn't have to be real complicated, right? We talked about this when it comes to
it shouldn't be.
Yeah, the statement of work should be real clear, literally just bulleted lists. We also used to add a section in on my side of assumptions. So it'd be the statement of work was outlining who was going to do what. And at the bottom, there was a section titled assumptions, which was, again, just another bullet point list. And they were just overstating the obvious. We are assuming client is going to provide X, Y, and Z. We're assuming that assets are going to be provided by X in this format. We're assuming that the client is taking responsibility for typos and copywriting and blah, 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 right? And so, like, again, real simple to read, and it's stuff that you just might take for granted, but we had this list of assumptions that sometimes was just good to have listed out. And that's another thing, from a cover your ass standpoint, having that statement of work, having those assumptions outlined, and then having some kind of contract, right? Having some kind of clause where if a client abandons a project, that you have some out. If if the client doesn't provide the files by a certain date, that now you can bump your timeline out. Having some of these things that it really kind of only come from having experience and doing them and running into issues and be like, oh shit, I wish that was in my contract. And so then you go back and you add it to your contract. But I know a lot of people don't have these. A lot of freelancers don't have contracts. They don't have the money to spend on a lawyer. Maybe they go and copy and paste something they found on like a free resource site or something like that. So what's the gameplay here, Joe, for people who are starting out? What's the best way for them to create some of these documents?
Yeah, great question. We just got this done. That just 6 months ago, we were a company that was finding things online and putting things together to create our own contract. Now we have our master service agreement. And this is a contract that we worked with a lawyer that outlines all of the legal rules in every project. It's a one contract for every project we work on. The statement of work is specific to that work. The master service agreement is for everybody. And it's actually very easy to read. That was one of our requirements, that anybody could read it. You didn't have to be a lawyer to understand it. It did cost money. It was expensive. The lawyer's time was very expensive, but I think he did a great job. Now, what can you do other than copy and paste? I don't know. That's what I was doing just 6 months ago. But as I'm saying this out loud, maybe I'm thinking we can do something to help people. Maybe not give our exact MSA, but we can give a version of it or pieces of it to help people out. Because I know this is a difficult thing and you're not sure and it's confusing. And yeah, that's what we do. That would be a
great piece of the agency incubator. Like I could see a whole segment on
great.
Just creating those assets. So like, for those who don't know, we pitched an agency incubator project as part of our Webflow Community Alliance, which we'll be talking more about next week on the episode. So if you're here and want to learn more about that, for sure, join us next week. But yeah, Joe, that would be like a real cool, because that was a big issue for me always. Was like, I don't know what this is. And I would, you write it and you adjust it and you try to sound like a lawyer. Wherefore thou... whatever the fuck. Like, you just try to sound like the sentence before and you're like, whereas the client, blah, blah, whatever. And you're just trying to like sound super lawyer-like.
It's confusing. Most of them are confusing and it's so frustrating to get one of those agreements. So our lawyer actually went too far with it. We told him to be relaxed and cool and not lawyer. And we actually had to put a little bit of lawyer on this work. That's how relaxed it was. So yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do something to get this type of content out to people in small agencies or creating agencies for this industry.
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay. There you have it. We're going to figure out how to solve some of those gaps for y'all. Stay tuned for the agency incubator, which I think is going to be a really cool project as we roll that out. So let's talk a little bit about how to manage these communications. So we've set the expectations. We've created a clear statement of work. We've set some kind of contract with the customer here. And now one of the things that I do on those expectations is always saying, who is our point of contact? Who is the person we're going to communicate with, right? And this is especially important when it gets deeper into the project or when you're working with large organizations who may have multiple stakeholders, right? And so you could start getting confusing instructions from different people on the team, or Mary says this and Steve says this, and then Fred comes over and he's like, yeah, but you need to change this. And you're like, but Mary and Steve, and he's like, well, I'm Fred. And you're just like, well, I don't fucking know who to listen to here. And that's where you get into chaos. And so, Joe, how do you go about that process? Like, how do you, as you're setting up this relationship with the customer, is there a moment where you're like, hey, we need to have this person to communicate directly with? Do you have them outline and name that person as part of the statement of work? How do you handle that, so that you can set up clear communications on these projects?
We tell the client right up front to have less people on the project, and more specifically, less people communicating on the project, ideally one person.
Mm-hmm.
And we tell them that we have a whole team working on it. We could have 2, 3, 4 people at once working on your project, but you're only going to talk to one, and you're probably only going to meet one. And we say, you should do the same thing. Assign one person that's giving all the orders, all the directions. Sometimes this works and they can do this. There are times where they cannot do this. They say, hey, we're set up this way. These 3 people are communicating, and great. Just be very careful when we start to get to 5, 6, 7 people on their team communicating. That is a recipe for disaster. And it's also very important to know where you're communicating. I like to pick a place that's most comfortable for the client. When they're Slack users, we love it. We love doing Slack Connect, getting people inside our workspace so that our team can communicate right away. We're in that space, they're in that space, and we're communicating fast in our own workspaces. This is ideal. But if they say, hey, we're on Teams, or we actually only use email as a company, we do use their platform of choice. And the reason is we do not want to bring them to a non-native environment, and we don't want them to have the chance to say, we didn't answer because we don't use this platform. We're not really on Slack, so we forget to answer. Not acceptable. We're going to choose your platform. This is where you communicate, and now we're going to make sure that this is easy for you to manage on your end. Very important. When you do this in the beginning, it's going to be a more clean project, and it's going to have less potential for issue. If this doesn't go well, you're setting yourself up for a problematic client that you have to fire.
Yeah. I mean, and you're setting yourself up for frustration. You're setting yourself up for headaches. And this is where you start, again, like getting to the end of a project and you're just like, I just want to get rid of this. Honestly, we're dealing with this right now. Joe, it might be interesting to get your take on this. We have a website that's essentially done, right? The site has been done for months now. The client is just kind of floating along because the client didn't have the exact copy finished. And then they gave us some line about their hiring a copywriter and blah, blah, whatever. Next thing you know, they send us this long document with content that matches nothing that's designed. And it's like,
oh my gosh.
So what are we going to do now? Because the site's done. We really just want to be finished with the site, and it's just dragging. And you can only play hardball a little bit because the work's done. You want to get paid by the client. And so you're kind of in this situation where, and it's funny because this client was so responsive all the way up until a couple months ago. I don't know if they got busy. I don't know, but whatever it was, they just kind of went off the radar. And I'm at a loss, honestly, for how to communicate with them and how to bring them back. We're trying to set up the next meeting with them and close this project out. But it's like, I'm at a loss sometimes too. So this isn't like, just because we're up here talking about this doesn't mean that we're always perfect at figuring this stuff out. So what's the game there, Joe? What happens when like a little bit of that stuff goes wrong? What's the fix for bringing things back in line when things kind of go off track a little bit like that?
I'm going to say educate. When a difficult request comes in, what I like to do is educate that client why that request is ridiculous. That's a ridiculous request, sending a whole page of different content for a site that's already been built. So, hey, client, this is going to require this type of work, and this type of work for this many hours. This is essentially rebuilding the website. And I would try to offer some solution. So let's say in this instance, the solution can be, We'll set you up an editor. You can go and edit any of this content on the site. I'll show a video of how to do this. And you can go in this entire build anywhere you want and edit the content and mix your content with what has been created. And when you educate and when you really give that client a clear understanding of why that request is not appropriate, hopefully they understand that and they see that and they accept it and they maybe move a little bit faster or they cancel the request. That's how I like to approach it.
Yeah. Okay, so comms. Did we go over all the rest of the comms stuff? Let's see here. Stated contact. Yeah, I think we could go into the warning signs from here, right? So how do we see these things coming? You know, how do we start to like notice this stuff before it gets down? And this is where I'd like to hear from the crowd a little bit. Where have you had problems with clients? Like, this is where I want to see your horror stories. What do you all see as the biggest warning signs for problematic clients, for clients dragging their feet or being non-responsive? You know, what do y'all see there as the biggest problems? And then let's run through some of our list here, Joe, of what we see as warning signs for problematic clients.
We have a great list. These are just all big red flags. Do not continue. First, always talking about saving money. And this usually happens from the beginning, that from step one, they are trying to figure out how to save the most amount of money for every step. How can we reduce this? How can we reduce this? If I take this off the project, will the cost be less? These people are problematic because they're not really valuing your work and they're always trying to get the best deal. And that does not go away. People don't do that for the initial project and then they transform to something else. They're going to do that every step of the way. And that means you're probably going to do a lot more work than what you're being paid.
Yeah. Yeah.
The bad one.
Yeah. That's, well, and it just goes just like, somebody being cost conscious is different than someone who's being cheap, right? Somebody who understands the value of what they're paying for, but wants to be reasonable and has fair expectations for how that money should be spent. This is different than somebody who's always like, you know, trying to get the deal, right? Trying to get the discount, trying to get like that, you know, like inside baseball price, or, you know, they don't know you, you're not friendly with you, but they're like, they want that 50% off discount. You know, they just have this expectation that somehow they're special and, you know, they should get a cheaper rate from you or something for whatever reason. So that's kind of like in my mind here, right? So it's not necessarily that somebody's worried about the price, because some of these projects get expensive and they're big budgets for these companies, but it's that when that price expectation has no root in reality. You know, when it's just kind of arbitrarily somebody saying like, oh no, that's just too expensive. Well, how do you know? You know, and so that's the problem here. And I wanted to get to this real quick, because this goes along with it, Vi. Same thing with the warning sign. What to do when the scope starts to change or add on while you start working. That goes back to that setting that expectation and the clear statement of work. And so that's a clear warning sign for me. If you have that outlined and the client's always trying to get more and ask for more and push, you know, like they're not staying to that agreed upon scope, right? And it's different if it's like, oh, a little something that we agreed to, or, you know, like, oh, we can add this little embellishment because it's going to go above and beyond and this is me over delivering. But if it's them just, oh, we need to add this new page now, or we need to add this whole new section, or there's a whole new collection item that we need to fit into this page now, like, and they just keep going and going, you got to find that, you got to, first of all, the expectations need to be clear up front so that if that does happen, you can get into an explanation of why that's above and beyond the scope. But this goes back to the CYA, covering your ass, setting out that clear scope of work. Any thoughts for Vi there, Joe?
Educating. Everything that Reimar just said and educating them why that is a bigger task.
Yeah.
Remember that a lot of times a client may ask you to do something and truly not understand the time requirements. They may have in their head that this is a very simple thing, but they didn't realize that it's 4 hours of work. So, hey, it's this, and this, which takes 4 hours. and this is not time that I planned for in the original agreement. This may make the project delay, or this may not have my next deliverable ready by next week because of this. You allow one or two of those, and then afterwards you say, hey, I've helped out a lot here, but this is too much. I've done too much over what I'm normally supposed to. We're not on track anymore.
Yeah. Let's look at some of these. Let's see some of these warning signs from the crowd here. So when clients start to be too busy for weekly project meetings, sure, Penny, that's a big red flag, is the client doesn't have time to meet or talk with someone they hired. Trenton is saying, I don't have new copy yet. I can get you that later, or, you know, use the copy from the old site. This is the problem people run into all the time, right? Like that's what we're running into here, right? On some of these projects. Let's see. Wyatt had a good one before too. Oh yeah, this one. Do not work for your family ever. Friends and family can be hard.
Nice.
They have different expectations, and it's hard to set clear boundaries with a friend or a family member like you might with a client, right? And so mom needs a website for her new little widget shop that she's making out of the kitchen or out of the garage or whatever it is, and she doesn't know or care that it's 4 extra hours of work or 5 or 10 hours extra. You know, you're my brother, you're my son, you know, like, come on, you're gonna tell your mom that you can, you know. And so like having clear boundaries, and that's a big deal for some of this stuff. So let's see what other red flags are coming in here. 80, Babis again.
We have Jeremy dragging on content is the usual first problem, and I agree with that. Those slow content deliveries, it usually does not end well.
Yeah. What really gets me is again when they start and then they change gears, which you know, it's hard to adjust for. You know, it's really hard when the client has been doing all the things right, and then all of a sudden they go, you know, off the rails or something like that. Robert's saying, we do research on the client, Google reviews, LinkedIn, etc. They're getting 2 stars for awful service. They're not going to be a great partner. Ooh, that's some good research right there. I like that, nice. Robert. That's a good move. Good. So what are some of our other red flags here? Let's look. Micromanaging every step. Yeah. So clients who have something to say about every little detail, right? And this could be, you could catch this long before you get into the project, because this is going to come at you like this is going to be apparent early on. This is somebody who has to like micromanage every sentence, even on the design phase, even on the copy back and forth. Maybe they don't, you know, they're going to start nitpicking contracts, you know, the little language here and there. Like sometimes you just got to let people go.
Very difficult to work with.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very difficult to work with.
Yeah.
When people offer equity in their company or a promise of a payment in a future date, or it's going to be a good portfolio piece for you, this is usually not the case. There's a rare instance where it may be a good portfolio piece for you, but when people offer that and that is part of their contribution to this project, that is usually a big red flag. You want to be careful of those equity, I'm going to help you out in the future kind of people.
Or I'm going to send you a bunch of business. Like, I'm going to tell all my friends about you. You're going to build this one site, and all of your website needs are going to be fixed from here on out, because I'm just going to send everyone to you. Those people never send referrals. They never, ever send referrals.
Never got one from them.
Yeah. Indecision, you know, so like they take forever to make decisions or to what else?
No way. They're going to do that the whole project.
Yep.
Lack of communication, ghost clients. So they're communicating and then they just go dead for 2 weeks, and they come back and say, hey, I got busy. We had to do something else. They deprioritize you and they care about something else and they ignore you. This can happen even in the contract phase. Just because it happens doesn't mean that's what will happen for the entire project, but be aware of this. If it happens more than once, a few times,
Yeah.
that could be a red flag to not
Yeah.
move forward with that client.
Yeah. And one of the things too is, and this goes back to having a primed pipeline, which is stuff we talk about in some of the more sales driven episodes here. It's hard to walk away from a client if you don't have another project lined up, or if you don't have a steady stream of new projects on the horizon. And so what I often see is like people end up putting up with this stuff because they haven't done the other things properly. They don't have enough lead flow. They don't have enough opportunities lined up, that they end up putting themselves through these like really gruesome processes because they need the work, right? If you have to have the project, then people are going to be able to run you, and clients can smell this, right? If you have a CEO of a business that's working with you, they already know how to negotiate and do these things. And if they smell weakness on your end, or if they smell somebody who's just going to say yes, and they can just put on this hard, like boom, 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 like we're in charge front, they're going to do it. And they're going to run you through it every time. Yeah. And you're going to be like, oh, why does this keep happening to me? It's like training a dog. It's almost never the dog's fault. It's almost always the dog owner who needs to be trained in how to handle the dog or deal with the dog. Clients and businesses is kind of the same thing, right? It's almost never, that hard client, if you meet him head on early on, or her head on, and you have good rebuttals to that, okay, now you can get back on level ground. And so like, you kind of need to have more deals, and you need to have steady flow in order to take advantage of some of this stuff. Otherwise, some of this advice is going to be irrelevant. So just keep that in mind as we're going through all this. Another warning sign real quick is the know-it-all client. And this is the one that bugs me. It's like the one that, oh, this is just a real quick, right? This isn't going to take too long. Let's just add this, or, oh no, we do it like this. This is how the SEO works, right? We're going to SEO the shit out of this website. People say to me sometimes, I'm like, what is that? What does that even mean? We're going to SEO the shit out of this. Like, what does that mean? Like, what are you going to do?
Yeah. People trying to be professionals that are not professionals. If you're hiring a professional, let the professional do their work. So if you're starting to work with a client and they're giving design feedback in a way that they should not be giving design feedback, like offering different hex colors and talking about spacing and talking about all these different things that they shouldn't be talking about, that's a big problem. Yeah. That person can have a project that actually never ends. You could be in a design project that never ends because they just want to keep changing it to make themselves feel like they have a role in that design. But that's not that's not how you run a project. So if you see that, get out of that one fast.
Yeah. And any kind of manipulative or dishonest behavior. So that's a perfect segue into this last one, which is basically anytime you feel your client is trying to twist you around or play you against somebody else, or they're telling two different stories to do two different people in the operation, if you're working on bigger teams or whatever, anything like that is just, that's a clear-cut red sign. Like, you just don't need to be, doing work with these folk. And in that context, you need to be honest and not be doing any of that yourself, right? And so just like these are warning signs for the client, these can be warning signs from the client about you. And so if you're doing any of these things, they can be just as easily as you're watching for the client to be doing this stuff. They may be looking for some of these signals from you. They may be looking for clear communication and, some of this structure. And if they don't see these things, then maybe they're moving on to the next client too. So don't just think that it's a one-way street when you're looking at these warning signs, or, you could be doing some of this stuff that you don't realize that's leading to trouble down chain on projects. And, having a real honest assessment of yourself and how you're doing that. If you find yourself in a problem all the time, like if you find yourself regularly coming to a head with clients, you maybe need to think about like what's going on in these processes on your side. Maybe it's not the client, right? If it happens once in a blue moon, that's a different story. But if this is happening a lot, you may be the culprit. And so don't overlook that as a potential warning sign if this is something you keep running into regularly.
That's a great point. Really, really great point. You have to be self-aware here. Very well said.
Okay.
And reacting to difficult requests. Okay.
Yeah, we mentioned this a second ago.
We've been touching on this.
Yeah, go through the
Yeah,
details of
throughout the
this.
whole episode, I'm all about the education, showing people and explaining to people why this request is unreasonable. Tie it back to the statement of work, tie it back to past messages, tie it back to past conversations. So if a client asks us to do something and they said something else earlier in the project, we can just educate them to say, hey, we did it like this because of your original answer. And your original answer was here in the email. We did this work based on this. And now you're asking us to change it. And this is actually an additional 5 hours of work on top of this thing that we already built. With that kind of delivery, it's a lot easier for that client to understand that they're not asking for something appropriate.
Yeah.
So educate, tell them why, really show them.
Well, and this is
Be
where it's good, right? Having that transparent and clear communication, and also documenting the communication, right? This is why,
Yes.
Going back to like the remote work stuff, there is one good reason that all this stuff happening in like a text medium is beneficial, is that there's records of it, right? And so if you go through and you say, hey, we did this a certain way because this is how we talked about it a week ago, and you said, it's very difficult for the client to say, no, we didn't say that. Nope, it's right here in this email or in this Slack conversation. We talked about X, you said do Y, we did Y, that's where we are. We can do Z, but we already did X. And so now we have to do X and Z. And so that's going to be, another thing. And so, yeah, I think a lot of it has to come when you get this difficult request. The reason you outline the scope and the statement of work at the beginning is so that anytime there's conflict, that's what you refer back to solve the conflict, right? And so when you get these difficult requests, you benchmark them against the expectations or the communications that you've already had up to this point. And that kind of is why you do that at the beginning, is to set the rules so that later on you can use those as like stopgaps.
Yeah, absolutely. And to not argue about it. This is something really important. We're going to get into firing people and what and how you actually fire somebody. And you have to do it in a very clear, level-headed way. If you start fighting with somebody, everything that happens in the project is going to fall apart. That when you fight, maybe you have a little bit of self-pleasure inside, that you get out some energy, that you're so mad at this client and you're arguing and you feel a little powerful. That is going to make it much more difficult to get what you want at the end. You have to be polite. You have to give them the facts. Notice how every time I'm explaining how we do this, it's fact-based. I'm not putting my emotions in here. I'm not going to complain. I'm just giving facts. And this is so important to actually have the person do what you want at the end. Maybe it's not exactly what you want, but you want is the most of what you can get, whether that's a little bit more payment or a safe breakup. That is done through being really calm, being really level-headed, and fact-based.
Yeah.
So that's how I like to fire people.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes you just got to be real clear. Sometimes it doesn't take a lot.
Always.
It's just, hey, this isn't working out. We've tried X, Y, and Z. At this point, I think, we need to find a different solution here, right? At this point, we're unable to continue moving forward on this project. The hardest part here is thinking about outstanding money or deliverables, right? And so when it comes to firing a client, it really depends on the timeline of the project, kind of where you're at, because if you've done all the work and you want to fire the client, well, now you got to be careful because you want to get paid, right? So you don't want to fire the client after you've done the work and now you're stuck having done the work and not, and so you don't want to create an antagonistic relationship there, because like Joe said, whoever got excited when somebody argued with them and then was like, oh, you know what? That person yelled at me real nice. Let me do exactly what they said. Like it's usually the opposite. It's like, oh,
never.
Yeah, fuck that. Now I'm going to drag my feet. Now I'm literally going to make it as difficult as possible to get what you want because you've like pissed me off for whatever reason. And so, like This is not this, Donald Trump style, you're fired kind of thing. This has to be like some smooth operator type, it's not you, it's me. We feel like this is moving in the wrong direction here. You probably be better served with somebody else doing X, Y, and Z from here, and sometimes you got to eat your pride a little bit. You got to swallow your pride a little bit.
Yes.
And just step away and kind of like, yeah, hey, this is us. This is not working okay for us.
And offer those next steps. It's not working out, and I'm going to tell you what I want. Don't let them say what the plan is. If you're going to break up with the client and fire this client, say what your next steps are. I would expect this payment because this and this and this was completed. I would expect that you can use all the work. I'm licensing all of the work to you. You own everything, or you own nothing. Say exactly what happens afterwards, and even give them options. You can use nothing and pay me nothing else from here, or you can use everything and pay me this little extra payment for the work that I already completed.
Yeah.
And be super clear about this. And if you give them the option, if it's all fact-based, if you're telling them the type of impact that this may have on both of our businesses, that is going to help them choose something and have a really good breakup. So just
and often this is outlined in your master service agreement or your contract, right? A lot of times this stuff is like a prenup agreement, right? In some kind of marriage contract, where if there's certain thresholds, it'll say, hey, this has been met, this has to be paid, this is yours, this is ours, so like a good contract is only relevant if you have a problem. By the way, you never need contracts for everything going great, right? Like, contracts are not there for the projects where everything goes swimmingly. The reason you have a contract, the reason you have some cover your ass documentation at the beginning of this, is so that if these situations come up, you have some recourse, you have some protection, you have some ability to say, no, this is how this is going to work. And ideally, that document is legally enforceable. Not to say that it's always going to come to that, but that's the reason for a contract. It's not necessarily because you think everything's going to go well. It's so that when something does go wrong, you have an outline and expectations on both sides for how that's going to play out.
Yes, contract, very important. I rarely talk about the contract. The contract's there, it's important, we need it. But I rarely talk about it because sometimes the amount of money is too low to even act on the contract. So what if somebody owes you $1,000 or $2,000 or even $3,000? This is a significant money for you as a freelancer, but that's not enough money to act on a contract. So it's not always just the contract. If you're rude and you say, look at the contract, it says this, I hate you, that's not going to matter, because the person's not going to actually do what you want. At the end of the day, you want the client to do what you want them to do. You don't want to find the mismatch in the contract. So use the contract, but lead with the kindness and facts.
Yeah, and I guess I mean in the contract is if somebody stiffs you on a fat payment of something, or if there's some real conflict,
it's needed.
If it's a small little amount like that, or if it's a minor, you're not going to win any, because you're not going to win any points by threatening anything, because like, what are the odds you're actually going to sue somebody for $1,000? Or you could in small claims court. It depends on where the client is, where you are. You could totally do that. And a contract would be beneficial, but again, trying to figure out a way without requiring that is the best way. I think Kai's got the answer right here. He said, just pretend you've been kidnapped. It's an easy out. So.
Nice. That's a good one.
Yeah. And Scapari, we're not trying to dismiss $1,000. We're just trying to say that it's hard to file legal action for $1,000, right? Because by the time you call a lawyer, if the lawyer is a couple $100 an hour, Now you're in for $500 just for them to figure out whether it's worth to do anything. And then if they got to file more paperwork or do another thing, now you spent $1,000 just in the lawyer. And so unless you're going to do it on principle and you're just going to say, I'm going to do this just to get the money out of the person, and I don't care if it costs me $2,500 to recoup this $1,000, you know, then that's a decision you got to make. So trust me, $1,000 is no joke. I'm not throwing away $1,000 either. All we are saying there is that it's, you know, like, how do you track it down? How do you force that? And even if you do get a judgment in the court, you still got to then track them down to get them to pay it, right? So let's say you do file a small claims judgment on somebody, or you do go to court and you win a judgment and the court says, okay, web designer, you get $2,000 from this company because your contract is legally enforceable and we agree with you. The court isn't going to go get the money for you. The court just serves you a piece of paper that says, okay, you can go get this money. And so now you have to go file whatever other paperwork or whatever injunctions or issues with the bank and to go get that money. And so this is why people typically don't file lawsuits for small amounts like that, because, you know, you're going to spend thousands of dollars just getting anywhere on that. So anyway, other thoughts on that? I think, do we fire the client? Let's see. Focus, honest and polite. Yeah.
Do we fire the client?
You had maybe some stories here. I didn't know if you had some stories that you wanted to share in there. Or
I can tell a quick story here. We actually had two situations where we needed to fire the client, be very polite with the client, and it worked both times. There was one company we were working with. It was a huge project, and they have been a problem from the beginning. Slow on deliveries, slow on content, and was just very difficult to work with. Everything that they did was late, and it seemed like they really didn't care. They put a new project manager on. That project manager had like all these design decisions from the beginning after months of work, and we said no. So sent them a fact-based message, explained everything that we wanted. We're going to keep the original payment. We're going to walk away, and we're going to set you up to work with another agency, that we're preparing all the files for another agency to go in and take this over. They were really mad about the email, but a week later, they came back and actually accepted the offer. And so we decided as a company to accept your offer and move forward. Success. So we got what we wanted. It was a little rocky. They didn't like how it happened, but it was fact-based. They didn't get their emotions involved, and it worked. Another client didn't pay us, still hasn't paid us for over 6 months. A pretty good sum. We need this money. This is important money for us. And they have been ignoring us and not responding. We'll do it soon. We'll do it soon. Nothing. So last week, I wrote them a message and I told them the impact that that money has on the business. The people that worked on the project got paid. Check. Everybody here is happy. But this money now came out of my bank to fund the payment for this people. We didn't have the money come in, so I had to supply the money myself to pay these people for the work. And it was very polite, very nice, and I explained everything that meant for us as a company. And a week later, we actually got forward movement on this payment. We should be receiving it hopefully within the next week. They started the process. We have all the information to their accountant, and it looks like it's going to work. So total kindness, and it really worked for both of these situations.
Yeah, I've had, and I had an issue, not necessarily, it wasn't like where we needed to fire the client, but like you were saying, we hadn't received payment and it had been a long time. And I was just real frank with the customer. I said, look, I'm a small operation, right? I do 1 or 2 websites a month, one a month, one every 2 months kind of thing. I can't sit here like I'm waiting on a $10,000 payment from you, right? Like I got bills to pay, I got overhead to pay, I got freelancers I got to pay. And so like sometimes you just need to be frank with people, and people understand that, right? Especially nowadays, people are starting to understand more that freelancers are doing work that they don't have, you know, a huge buffer, you know, in the bank to float some of these big projects or whatever. And so like a lot of times maybe they don't know if it's a corporation, they could be used to paying 30, 90 days out. You know, they could have an accounting department where things get lost all the time and it just takes them forever to process payments, and that's just how they operate, and so sometimes you just need to like be clear and say, hey, this is what's going on, and come up with some kind of agreement. And so I think in my mind, firing the client is for sure the last move, but it is necessary sometimes. It's, we've had to walk away from relationships, and sometimes it's not for any reason other than like it's not a productive client anymore. When I made the switch to coming to Finsweet, I had a bunch of Webflow sites that I had built for people, and I was doing like, some of them were client billing, and every once in a while somebody calls you out of the blue and they're like, hey, we want to add this to the site. No big deal. I'm going to send you an invoice for a couple $100. I'll take care of it. Well, when I started over here, I just didn't want to do any of that, right? Like now I'm doing completely different stuff. I'm not taking new freelance projects. And so like these people would call me and I was like, oh, I don't want to do it. It's a brain suck, right? And so like, that's a different reason to have to fire a client. And so it was like, hey, I'm not doing this anymore. Like now I provide a solution, and I had to just kind of push them out the door to somebody else, and so there could be reasons outside of relationship stuff or bad communication or whatever. It could just be your business is evolving. It could be that you raised your prices and the clients are not going to come with you because they're in a different tier now. And so for any number of reasons, you may have to have a hard relationship with your client about some of this stuff. And so going back to just honesty and sincerity is the key. That's the best thing you can do.
And that's the strategy. What you just said, the process of firing that client is the same exact strategy that we've been talking about. Tell them everything that's on your mind. Don't hold back. Don't start fighting. Don't be rude. Just be transparent. And I know it sounds so simple, and but a lot of people don't do this. There's so many people that end these relationships in a non-transparent way or in a fighting way. And that's really the message of this show, that's not the way to do this.
Right. Yeah. And don't just leave things hanging either, because maybe you don't like conflict, right? It's worth an email. It's worth an honest message, and also give the benefit of the doubt when possible, right? Don't assume bad intent right off the bat. Don't take things personal. Like, you don't know what other people are dealing with. You don't know what circumstances are at the company, like, just because this is your one project that's like the big thing that you're working on doesn't mean it's that big a deal for them. And so sometimes like it could just be, again, a miscommunication or a misalignment on priority or, what's happening. And so, keep a little bit of that in mind too, a little bit of grace, a little bit of, forgiveness. Absolutely. And just, what's a good faith, you should operate under good faith, even if the client's not always doing that.
We have some good questions. First from Osma, is it ethical to shut down the site until they pay? That's a tough one. It's a real tough one. We have never done that. We also haven't threatened to do that. Why? I like to take the path of least resistance. Even if that means the money is less or I don't get exactly what I want, my goal is to be separated from the situation as fast as possible. And when you do something like a shutdown, I think you're asking for a real conflict, a lot of fighting, and maybe some legal trouble. People can take that very seriously. So if you're doing that, you have to be really, really careful about it and really sure that you want to do this. Yeah. This is not something I would do. I don't know if it's ethical or not. I think it may depend on the situation, but yeah, this is not something I have.
Osama, I'll speak to this a little bit because I think it comes down to what's in your contract, right? This is why if you're doing hosting or if you're doing the client billing or something, you just need to have a line item. And this is why I like using Webflow for the client billing, because I don't have to shut anything down. Webflow is going to do it for me, right? And so in my contract, I'm just real clear. I don't host your site. This is a pass through to Webflow. again, you have to be clear if you're doing this, if you're charging markup or whatever, because they can easily just go to Webflow, see the price for hosting and the difference in what you're charging. They're like, well, you said it's a pass-through expense. So just real clear in how you communicate here. Whatever, you should be clear in whatever markup you're charging or however you're operating on this. But I'm just real clear and I say, Webflow handles your hosting. You know, like this is an automated thing. If you miss your payment and that third email goes out, your website's going to get turned off. And so as long as that's clear, and then I even used to charge a reinstatement fee. So I would build in another couple $100 that if you get turned off for non-payment, it's going to cost you $200 to turn this thing back on. Because now I got to take my time. I got to go republish the site. I don't know if I got to do any DNS things. And so again, just as long as you're clear and upfront, it shouldn't be a surprise. Your client, you shouldn't just turn off the site after 3 months with no expectation or notice to the client, because that could get you sued, right? Especially if you're just doing it without notice, without any kind of setup, whatever. And also, this is probably more relevant on smaller sites, because bigger sites, you know, they're not going to miss a hosting payment. You know, this is almost always going to be a mom and pop shop problem. This is a small operation. They forgot to pay their bill. A credit card got canceled somewhere. Something happened, you know, and so like, again, you don't know, right? It could have been that the marketing person had their credit card on the hosting account and then it gets canceled, and it's not malicious. They just didn't get the new credit card updated. And so like, there's a million reasons for stuff like that to happen. I don't know that it's ethical to do it unless you have it stated out in the contract.
Nice. That is true. Absolutely. We have a great question from Charles, who seems to be in a problem right now. Hey, I have this client and it's been going great for several months, which is beyond, okay, it's not going well. It's beyond the initial timeline. Everything is done like the design and dev, but they keep on dragging the content. What should I do? That's a tough one. It does happen. This absolutely happens. What I recommend you do is be totally transparent. I want to wrap up this project. I've finished everything that needs to be done here. We just have this little tiny part. Remember, you can update this content afterwards. This doesn't have to be 150% complete. That's the point of Webflow. So send me something. I'm going to be working this day and this day full-time on your project, or part-time on your project, to make sure that we get this settled by this date. And if we can do this, then we'll be happy. We'll continue on with our website and our business, and everybody will be happy. So just lay that out. Give them a plan to actually finish. Tell them how it's impacting you. And hopefully they should see, okay, let's get this going. This could be ready in 2 weeks. Let's do it.
Yeah.
That's what I would do.
Yeah. I agree. And Riley's going back to the comment of having a clear contract is crucial for these scenarios. It takes a lot of back and forth. For sure. As clear as those expectations can be from the beginning is the best thing you can do. That doesn't really help when you're kind of at the end here, which is what Charles is saying, that like, hey, the work's essentially done. This is kind of what's happening, Joe, on that the website I was referencing. It's like the site's done. Yep. We've literally been sitting on this site for months, and the client's just like, you know, and it's like, so I don't know. That's tough. You got to find a way to re-engage them and get their interest back. Hopefully they're committed to the project and they don't want to walk away from it, you know?
And they should feel like this new website is much better than their existing website. So tell them, think about how much business you're losing keeping your existing website done. We have this beautiful website. It's sitting here. It's waiting for you. We spent all of this time on here. Let's not let this go to waste. Let's finish this with this exact plan. We can both hit it, and let's get this thing live. Let's celebrate.
Yeah.
That usually gets a pretty good reaction. And you can do this multiple times. If they don't do it, if it doesn't work the first time, you can send this again. You can send this each month, each week. You need to get it done. So get them moving.
Yeah, Venu, that's kind of the same thing here. What should I do if the client puts a project on hold after it's designed and developed and he's not even sending revisions? It's kind of the same thing here.
Same thing.
Penny's got Penny's got a nice point here. If the client provides content, include a clause that final payment is not dependent on the site being live. Payment should be received when your work is done. That's a good point. Penny, I don't know how you would enforce that, but I like the idea of outlining and saying, hey, when the work is done, we don't care if you publish the site, we got to get paid. Because you could transfer a site to somebody and they maybe don't publish it for 3 months. And if they're waiting for that site to publish live before they pay you, you know, maybe you're going to be waiting for a long time. So that's a really good point there, Penny.
Absolutely.
Okay. We're well over our time here. Should we?
Yes, we are.
Yeah. Should we jump into the co-workspace for a little bit, or should we just call it a day? We do have some prep for next week to do. What is our move here?
Let's jump into the co-work for a little bit.
Okay. So for those of you who don't know, it's going to be finsweet.com/cowork. And we'll share that in the chat there. And we usually hang out after the shows for a few minutes. So let's say we'll hang out for 15 or 20 minutes and answer any questions, hang out with anybody who wants to come and chat with us one-on-one. But we'll end the stream here and leave it at that. Thanks all for hanging with us for another episode of the Growth Podcast. Catch you next week. Make sure you subscribe and like the video. That helps us a lot. So if you're hanging out and watching with us, subscribe, like the video. There's 24 likes here. We got 48 of y'all watching right now. So we could double that with a real quick like button. And we would appreciate that. Join us next week to learn more about how you can get involved with the Webflow community. That's going to be a very interactive episode. Lots of fun. So catch you next time. Otherwise, we'll catch you in the co-working space. See ya.